Okay. Hi everyone, welcome. We have a heavy agenda, so we're running a little late. Thank you and welcome.
I'm just going to check that for you, Mayor.
Yeah. And our cameras are on for the public. Okay, good.
No, they don't view anything. No. This meeting is for you guys.
Kevin, you might want to pull your mic a little closer so Janice can hear us.
He ignored me when I said that too.
We'll just wait for Mr. McClure and. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the regular business meeting of Nelson City Council on June 11th, 2018. I'm going to call our meeting to order. And we have a very big agenda this evening. We have a lot of items to discuss, and Council, I'll do my best to get us through this efficiently and make sure that we have good discussion, but that we move efficiently. I'd like to begin our meeting with our Aboriginal acknowledgement. The City of Nelson acknowledges all Aboriginal peoples on whose traditional territories we stand. We honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. Thank you. And the other thing that I would just like to acknowledge is that our community, our entire community, has been impacted by some very sad events in the last couple of weeks. We lost a young man, a young 16-year-old man named Jaden Bishop. We also had a very tragic incident on Baker Street where a younger man lost his life. And we also had the passing of our past police chief, Dan Maluda. This has been very difficult for all of us. We are a very caring community, and I'd just like us to have a moment of silence just to reflect on that and to, if you pray for those people. Thank you, everyone. We have no late items this evening, Council, I believe. I just wanted to let the gallery know that Councillor Morrison is joining us by telephone this evening, and Councillor Purcell is in attendance at a conference in Vancouver and won't be with us this evening. I'd like you to have a motion to adopt the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Daly, seconded by Councillor Warmington. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Could we have excuse me, I just lost my agenda there. Could we have adoption of the minutes from regular meeting May 7th and a special regular meeting on May 7th? Thank you, Councillor Sherbo, seconded by Councillor Daly. Is there any discussion about those minutes? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We'll begin our discussions this evening regarding there's two versions to choose from here. A development variance permit application from 424 Latimer Street, and this is a variance application to vary the exterior setback and height envelope to build a dormer. And we have Mr. Toom here to describe the application. And would you like to proceed, and then we'll move to the recommendation?
I'll keep it quite short. This is pretty straightforward. Essentially, the house is quite old. The house basically spans the entire width of the lot, and on the exterior side setback, so facing Ward Street, the property owner wants to construct a dormer. The house itself doesn't exceed the height restriction. It's just a matter of, due to the proximity to the property line, having to vary the side setback and the height envelope as well. So the overall height from the peak of the house doesn't actually increase with this variance.
Thank you, Mr. Toom. I'm going to read the staff recommendation, and it's that the application for a development variance permit to vary the requirements of zoning bylaw 3199/2013 to allow for the construction of a dormer on the subject property be approved for Lot 18, Block 44C, District Lot 95, Kootenay District Plan, NEP 9500 424 Latimer Street, as follows. to vary the exterior side lot line from 1 meter to 0 meters, and to exempt the property from the height envelope requirement as per attached plans. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Warmington. It's seconded by Councillor Adams. Discussion, Council? Any questions?
So that dormer will not go beyond that property line?
No.
Okay.
Any further questions or discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And Councillor Morrison, feel free to speak up at any time to get my attention.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, not a problem.
Our
Thank you.
next item on the agenda is another development variance permit, and this is for Perrier Lane. Go ahead, Mr. Toom.
All right, so the proposal here then is to add essentially a studio. It's not a second dwelling unit on the property. It's just that the existing house is rather small, and the property owners would like to build, sort of extend their living space without doing an addition onto the home. So it's a detached accessory building. The height variance requested seems quite dramatic. I know, going from 4.5 meters to 6.9, but it is actually just a single-story structure. This has to do with the way that our height, the way our height is calculated in the city of Nelson, going from the peak of the roof down to average grade. The height technically would be less if they put fill underneath. If you look at the drawings, it's on a bit of a slope. If they had chosen to put fill under there, the height would actually be substantially less. So it's just a matter of that. It costs less money to do the fill.
Thank you, Mr. Toom. Are there any questions for Mr. Toom? Councillor Warmington?
Curious about, so my understanding is the property butts up against Area E?
Yeah.
And
the RDCK.
is there any requirement for us to talk to that property owner?
Actually, a notice was sent to all properties within 60 meters, including the RDCK, and it was also a referral sent to the planning department at the RDCK as well.
Thank you.
All right, we have a recommendation that the application for a development variance permit to vary the requirements of zoning bylaw 3199/2013 to allow for the construction of an accessory building on the subject property be approved for Lot 29, District Lot 304, Kootenai District Plan NEP 85506, 2501 Perrier Lane as follows: to increase the maximum accessory building height from 4.5 meters to 6.9 meters as per attached plans. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo, seconded by Councillor Warmington. Further discussion. Go ahead, Councillor Adams. No?
I was getting ready to say yes.
Oh, all right. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed?
Yay.
Motion- Thank you, Councillor Morrison, and the motion carries. We now move on to a third development variance request from 606 9th Street. And could I have you speak to this one, Mr. Toom?
For sure. So this is a little bit of an unusual one that's probably worth talking a little bit more about than the previous two. The proposed lot coverage then from 35 to 48% is to construct a carport with a outdoor patio on top of it. The house is currently under construction and is being built to just about 35%, which is the maximum lot coverage. And at this point, the property owner has requested to put this carport on for a number of reasons, including mobility access issues for one of their parents who will be living with them. The lot coverage, so the definition of lot coverage and the concept of it, a lot of it does have to do with site permeability, stormwater management, etc. The definition that we have right now for lot coverage restricts buildings and structures, such as from decks to houses and sheds, but it doesn't exactly speak to soft landscaping or permeability. So the rationale for this recommendation then is that the property owner, if granted the variance, has agreed to, prior to actually being issued the variance permit, has agreed to put a covenant on title that would ensure that the rear driveway area is constructed out of permeable pavers, permeable material, instead of just your standard concrete, which is not permeable. And doesn't sort of help the broader goal of site permeability. There have been two letters that have been submitted against through the 60-meter neighbor notice, 2 letters submitted against this variance. One of them was received last week and was attached to the report, and another one was received today.
The other one was emailed out to council. If you haven't read it, I do have it here.
Councillors, have you had a chance to look at it?
Yes.
I've had it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll leave it at that, pending any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Toom. So there is a recommendation from staff regarding this. Are you ready for the recommendation? I'll read it out. That the application for a development variance permit to vary the requirements of zoning bylaw 3199/2013 to allow for the construction of a carport on the subject property be approved for Lot 6, District Lot 97, Kootenai District Plan 90236, 606 9th Street as follows. To vary the maximum lot coverage from 35% to 48%. On the condition that a covenant first be registered on title stipulating that the uncovered portion of the parking area abutting the rear lane be constructed entirely of permeable material. And 2, that council directs staff to conduct a review of lot coverage. That should be separate. So we'll just deal with the first part of that recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Daly, seconded by Councillor Adams. Discussion, council.
Well, I'm concerned about the letters that we received. There definitely are concerns from the neighbors about viewscape and about overcrowding, which I'm not quite understanding.
So the viewscape, the letter that was attached then to the council report, so speaks to sort of that entire block there. The viewscape would not be further sort of impacted by the carport. The carport isn't higher than the house itself. That what they were sort of speaking to in terms of context was the fact that these lots were sort of subdivided in the first place by the city. On the other hand, though, top of this carport, then there's a patio is proposed. So while the viewscape in terms of lake and mountains wouldn't be further impacted, there will be people who are not just on, sitting on the ground level, but also sort of activity on the second story.
And then on the second one, he's talking about increasing density. Now, is this, I didn't see anything in there that...
No, this variance request has nothing to do with the density. These lots, I think there were 6 of them approximately on 9th Street when they were subdivided. The city placed a covenant on title that required that it be a single-family house with a suite that's constructed. So you can't only build a single-family house. So that's sort of speaking to a previous, taking issue with the previous decision by the city.
I got you. Thank you.
Hi, it's me.
Go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
Go ahead, me.
Thanks. Sorry. I have a little bit of concern in terms of the fact that, this isn't just a carport, but this now becomes a fairly significant deck, because a carport doesn't need to be to accommodate 2 cars. It doesn't need to be 20 by 30. But a 20 by 30 deck is a very nice addition to the home, and that's increasing the living space of this property by another third. And I could see why neighbors perhaps have some concern about expanding out to 48% lot coverage.
So I think an option would be to approve the carport without the deck from council.
That would be an option. There is, it would be difficult right now, I would imagine, to, in reality, in practice, to have that. On the original building plans as approved, there is already on the top level, there is a door, French doors that are part of that. That was approved as a Juliet balcony, so to say, right, with a balcony that's sort of just blocking the door right there. So there, I would imagine that it would be difficult to enforce in reality, as there already are French doors that are opening onto the area where there's the patio. The variance request is, as described in the RFD, exceptionally large. There's not much precedent for a lot coverage variance this large. Speaking to Councillor Morrison's point, we did look at, well, what if it was only a one-car carport instead of a two-car carport? Aesthetically, it didn't really make a lot of sense given the shape and the design of the house to have just a one-car carport on the back. So from our perspective, in terms of a design perspective, it did seem like an all-or-nothing situation.
So you could send it back.
Well-
You could send it back to staff if you want to look at some different options.
All right, so go ahead, Councillor Adams.
Well, how often are they gonna use the carport? Like, you're not gonna see them sitting out there in the carport night and day. They'll be out there on sunny days, have a barbecue maybe. I think we should just go with what they've asked for, because the door, like you said, the access is already there. And they're not gonna be out there partying night and day, and it's not gonna be I personally don't think it's gonna be a big deal. They'll be out there, they might have an umbrella and a couple of chairs out there, but that's
And
not
a
gonna
hot
hurt.
tub.
That's not gonna hurt anything. Anyway, I'm in favor of the project.
Thank you.
I apologize for not asking you sooner or before tonight, but could the owner just put in the permeable paving stones without a variance and use it for parking, or no?
Oh, for sure, yeah. So the original building plans as approved include a driveway. On the presumption, there was no requirements in terms of how that driveway was constructed.
And the other piece is that a shed or that below 100 square foot shed would be allowed there if someone wanted to?
No, even though, a shed under 100 square feet doesn't require a building permit, but it still has to fit within lot coverage. And the applicant has already maxed out the lot coverage.
That was my question. I did go by the property, and it didn't mean just the way the houses are and backing onto the park. It didn't look like it was going to overlook into anywhere. I didn't get that impression that it would be a problem.
All right, so where we're at is we're asking for an increase in lot coverage. The recommendation is that we do approve, and that there would be a covenant stipulating that the uncovered portion of the parking area always be of a permeable material, so that especially for water runoff. And the concerns we've heard are that this would be adding about a third. I believe I heard Councillor Morrison say space to the house, and she has some concerns about the amount of extra deck space that would be outside of the house there. And also on the lot coverage. So council, we have a couple of ways to go here. We could send this back to staff to speak with the proponent more. We could pass it tonight, or we could defeat it. Councillor Sherbo.
So the deck space is the roof of the carport, is that correct?
Yeah.
Same with Councillor Adams, I'm okay with it.
All right.
Good.
Councillor Daly.
One more question to staff. Could the homeowner close in that carport
It would be
at all?
it would be solely approved as a carport. So
Meaning you could not put anything on the sides, or?
yeah, so as per sort of the resolution, that would be probably the safest thing then would be to actually amend the resolution then as recommended, just to clarify then that an open carport is what is approved specifically.
I think that's important too, that it not
Yes.
become a storage.
So you're proposing that we add the word
Open.
an open carport? Isn't
I
carport
think
open?
we would need to do that as a separate resolution, because the development variance is varying the bylaw. That's what that is doing, which is not, you're then stipulating something further that you.
Thank you. So council, are you moving towards approval or
To have
or
a vote.
or another look at it by staff, or
Approval, let's go.
okay, I'm not hearing any further discussion. I'm going to call the question on the motion as is. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion carries.
Thank you.
So do we want to add about the open carport, huh?
Yes.
So could I have a motion that would require that this is approval for an open carport?
Period, only. So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Adams, and second by Councillor Sherbo. Is there further discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Second part of this resolution is that council directs staff to conduct a review of lot coverage calculation and explore alternative regulations that prioritize site permeability. Mover?
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, Councillor Daly, second by Councillor Warmington. And is there further discussion on this? All in favor? Opposed, and motion carries. That will ensure that when we, as we move towards a time when we're having these torrential rainstorms, it's really important that we have soil permeability. My agenda just disappeared. I'm sorry, folks. I'll be right there.
I think too, as we densify and have more on-site parking, we want that to be permeable.
Yeah. Our next order of business is a request for an exemption from 121 High Street, and this is a short-term rental request. Go ahead, Mr. Toom. Oh, I'm sorry.
Capital
Did I
Theatre.
miss something?
You're a D.
Capital Theatre.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my agenda disappeared, and my written agenda doesn't have that on it. Whew.
So we're at
Don't
seven.
ever let people tell you your iPad can't get full. Every once in a while it goes, that's enough. Okay. I'm sorry.
7D, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. All right. So the Capitol Theatre is looking to do a couple of things. They would like a letter of support for a couple of projects that they want to do. So the staff recommendation is that council directs staff to prepare a letter of support for the Capitol Theatre application to the Columbia Basin Trust. I have,
Both of these are together.
oh, thank you. And further, that council approve the inclusion of the bench in the public art inventory.
I'll let it.
Go ahead, Councillor Warmington, and seconded by Councillor Sherbo, and discussion. Go ahead, Councillor Warmington.
Well, I was just wondering if, I'm sure this has already gone to the CDC. Yeah, thank you.
So
The
basically
CDC
where, so that, CBT's created this new, public arts program, up to $30,000, I think, per, community. So I did send it to the CDC and said, what's your process in identifying these? Clearly would like to, be applying. So they've had some discussion and you know, basically said they, you know, projects that come to them that fit, they would support council equally, providing letters of support for those groups. And they're not asking you to select one over the other, but any ones that they identify as positive applications, and they think they expect more than this one. This is the one that's been brought forward at this stage.
Thanks for clarifying that. Any further discussion on this item? Not, all in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Now we're on to the request for an exemption of short-term rental from 121 High Street, and I have Ms. Moreau up.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our business license bylaw says that in order to be considered a grandfathered short-term business license holder, you had to,
Sorry, just before you go here, Janice has excluded herself from any
that's
short-term in the past.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Morrison, will you be recusing yourself from this item?
Yes, I will recuse. What would you like me to do? Are you going to phone me back, or shall I just sit here
Yes,
and be
we'll phone you
quiet?
back.
Yeah, I will phone you back.
Thank you,
Okay,
Councillor.
bye.
Lock yourself in the bathroom.
okay, so the bylaw says that in order to be grandfathered, you had to have a license prior to January 1st, 2016. So this applicant only applied for her license in August 2016. However, she is requesting that she be grandfathered. So she applied for license in August and she received her license in October of 2016. However, in November, so after she got her license, it was only then that we decided that we were going to put this grandfathering clause into place. And the reason for this is that we didn't want to see a bunch of people try to get in under the wire before we approved those regulations that became effective January 1st of 2017. The applicant's point is that she didn't try to beat the system. In fact, she didn't know anything about the regulations. And I would confirm that she didn't know anything about the regulations because we didn't know anything about the regulations until November, well after she got her license. So following approval of those regulations in December of 2016, the applicant came and met with us right away, and she was really distraught because she had spent a lot of time and effort working through the process. She put money into her secondary suite. And I think she's kind of feels like we're pulling a fast one on her. So anyways, we had this long discussion, and I agreed to give her the grandfathered rate, and that I would take forward an exemption report to council. And I intended to do it within the first 6 months. However, it's now a year and a half later, and I'm only now getting it in front of you. So it is our fault that it has taken so long to get this to you. So, in spite of the fact that she doesn't meet the date in the bylaw to be considered grandfathered, I think it's pretty clear that she had no intention of trying to beat the system. And so we do recommend approval of this exemption.
Council, if you have questions of information, further information from Ms. Moreau, we'll allow that. But if not, if you're looking to get into debate around this, then we'll get a motion on the floor so we can do that. So
I just want to maybe add before you put this on the table. Unfortunately, there's a few different items all in this one report. Really, the grandfathering provisions you've already approved in the bylaw. So those are, certain properties that were before that had existing B&B, had followed all the right rules, et cetera. You had made that decision that they would be treated that way and that they wouldn't be subject to the cap on continuing to operate, even if they sold to another person that wanted to continue to operate a B&B. So you've already made that decision. This really is going back to look at if we had brought this forward back, a year and a half ago to say because of this particular person, the work they had done, et cetera, that they were establishing a traditional B&B under the rules that were of the day. And at a staff level, we felt, yes, they hadn't, they weren't one of these ones operating outside your regulations that were trying to now, kind of, beat the system. They were legitimate, wanting to operate a B&B just like the other ones that were already in place at that time. And that's why we felt as staff that they met the grandfathering provisions. So I just, not kind of, you've already made your decision on how they would be treated if they're a grandfathered property, so you don't really need to look at that piece. You just need to decide whether this one should be treated as a grandfathered property and get that rate. The other thing is we have looked at our business licensing bylaw and the zoning, and we have some, this is brought up that we need to probably tweak that a bit. Alex is going through sort of changes to the short-term rental regulations that we'll be bringing back. So we'll be bringing back some short-term rentals because the same thing will happen whether you're a grandfathered B&B or you're a new short-term rental. What happens mid-year if you sell your property and somebody wants to carry on as a short-term rental property? Do they, do we say, too bad, we're going to now advertise and everybody's going to have a right, or are we going to say, these folks have invested in their properties for that purpose, and should they be treated like someone that didn't sell their property and again have preferential right to be one of the short-term rental people going forward? So that's something that we'll bring back as part of that bigger review. But simply this one is, we would have recommended a year and a half ago that this particular person met your rules around grandfathering. At the time when we selected that date, we didn't think we had anybody in that sort of transition period, and January 1st was when you got your business license, so that's why that date was used in the bylaw.
all right, Councillor Daly.
Just a couple of quick questions. One, Is there any more like this that might fall into that? This will be a one of?
Yep.
If a B&B that's grandfathered doesn't apply for their license and pay the $80 in any 1 year, would they then revert to the old plan? They'd be no longer grandfathered?
Correct. They have to apply by December 15th.
And the second is, do we have the ability to bring the grandfathered B&B license rates up to?
You can
what the-
review those rates any year.
We can do that.
you want. Yep.
So I'm okay with this, okay.
Okay, so,
do you
got
wanna
all
put
the
a
information,
motion on the
so
table?
the,
No, we don't have a motion on the
no,
floor.
we don't have a motion on the floor, that's what I was going to do earlier.
There's no motion on the floor yet.
So you're moving the recommendation, Counselor Adams, so, and, all right, and it's being seconded by Counselor Daly. Is there further debate or discussion on this? Ready for the question, Council? All in favor? Motion carries, thank
Okay,
you.
so if I could just have a minute to get Councilor
Yeah,
Morrison.
so we'll just wait to get Counselor Morrison back.
Thank you.
I'll be looking forward to reviewing those again.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's a number of things that we're going to tweak in terms of the
Should be paid by the hour.
process.
Music. Oh.
Waiting for others. You are now the host of this meeting. Waiting for others to join.
She thought it was gonna be a long time.
Okay, we got time.
Because it so often is.
I'll phone her back in 10 minutes. Let's keep going.
Hang on, it's calling right now.
It's important that she's here for this discussion.
Yeah, but what if she left the room for half an hour?
No, she wouldn't do that.
Oh, yeah, right.
Seems kind of silly for her to have gone offline. You could have just kept her and she couldn't speak. Because she can look it up and see what was said anyway.
No, but if you are in
I guess we'll go ahead. I'll try to
Let's
get her again.
go.
She didn't answer, so.
All right. So we're going to move on, and hopefully Councillor Morrison will join us eventually. In our ongoing process around the working on the legalization, upcoming legalization of cannabis, we are putting together how we will process applications. And this next part is it's the first three readings of how we might go through a licensing procedure. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Toom again before we launch into the recommendation. Do you have anything to say?
I do.
I'll bet you do.
So I'll preface this by saying then that there hasn't been any changes to this proposed bylaw since the Committee of the Whole meeting presentation a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to try and keep this as sort of strictly to chronological order as possible in terms of the workflow, what happens when people apply for a cannabis retail license. So the province is going to do seemingly a little bit more vetting actually of applications than we had originally anticipated. The province, when someone's interested in having a store, they're going to go to the province and they're going to have to sort of check off a number of boxes. The province is actually anticipated as well too to verify their compliance with our municipal zoning, as I understand, and they'll have other requirements as well too, of course, on their level. So if an applicant is able to get through the provincial, the initial provincial vetting, it's at that time then that the application gets forwarded to the municipality, and that's where this procedures bylaw kicks in. As I said last time, a couple of weeks ago, the first number of sections, basically up until point 6, that public input point, is pretty much the same as cleaned up, if anything, a little bit from the liquor licensing procedures. What the main difference again is that there are proposed to be a limited number of cannabis retail spots
Has
available.
joined the meeting.
Good.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. We've just begun on the cannabis item, and you're joining at a good time to hear Mr. Toombs' report.
So can I just
Thank you.
just add there, the differences between liquor and cannabis is the province limits the number of liquor, and they've asked council to make the rules regarding cannabis. So there is restrictions on the number of liquor stores. That's set by the province. They've asked, they've chosen not to do that for cannabis. Other provinces certainly have, but in our case, they've punted that back to local government. So I wouldn't characterize as there's no restrictions on liquor, and there is on cannabis. There's definitely on liquor, but it's done at the provincial level.
And there is a moratorium.
The one on the cannabis side.
And there is a moratorium on liquor stores as well, too,
there's
at this
no
point.
more allowed at this stage.
So, so coming back to this, and as I tried to emphasize last time as well, too, all eligible applications will be brought to council for consideration. So, if at any point an applicant, we receive an application, however, that doesn't comply with zoning or that isn't able to meet the business license requirements, which haven't been tabled yet, that'll be for discussion at a later date, but it fails to meet any of our bylaws, then no, they won't come to council. Otherwise, you will see them. So the remaining part of the processing procedure then pertains to how do staff come to a recommendation? And of course, the point of that recommendation is to, the objective of it is to help you as council in your decision making should we get 10, 20, 30 applications for a very limited number of spots. So the matrix that's part of this bylaw, we did quite a bit of research into what's been going on in other jurisdictions, from Newfoundland and Labrador down to Palm Desert, California, and try to cherry pick the pieces that seem to make the most sense for what our community objectives are and for what seemed to be sort of practical ways of evaluating an application, and that would contribute to overall sort of a better slate of cannabis retail stores in the community. So I won't go through them point by point, unless perhaps in the questions that one of you would like me to. But again, this is used by staff then to sort of score applications, assign a score to them, and present that for your information as a recommendation. It doesn't, whether an application scores 20 or 25 points on the community compatibility and impact section doesn't necessarily sort of completely remove them from the process, so to say. If there's other pieces of information, for example, what comes through the public input and comment stage, that's pertinent. That'll also be something for your review as well as any other aspect of the application. So the scoring happens then, and perhaps at this point then I'd direct you then to what I think should be the last page then on this report, which is the workflow, sort of the flow chart then. Presumably then we're going to have more applications than there are spaces. So if you look down to the green section at the bottom of the page, it presents a scenario for what happens if we receive 20 applications. So again, we propose to batch these on a quarterly basis so that it isn't really a matter of first come, first serve, who got in the door 5 minutes before the other person, but to sort of batch them up over the period of a quarter, and then look at them area by area. So those areas will be something that we'll discuss the next item on zoning, but based on the current amending bylaw as proposed of 2 downtown, 1 Railtown, 1 Nelson Avenue, 1 Lakeside Industrial, we have if there's more applications than there are spaces available, we're going to be looking at the scores. And in fact, for staff recommendation, if an application doesn't score 50% nonetheless, we wouldn't be recommending it to go ahead. Nonetheless, it would come to council for your consideration. In a scenario then, for example, in the downtown where you say 13 applications are eligible and have been gone through the process despite only having 2 spaces available, what we would do then is sort of rank those in terms of score. Again, public input all being equal. that the public input can also weigh into staff's recommendation, but sort of being generally equal, ranking them by scoring percentage, and considering all applications that are within 10 percentage points, so 10% margin, as being equal. So that is to say then that just if application A has a score of 85 and application B has a score of 90, it's a very trivial margin between the two. We're not going to consider that as well. The second application necessarily wins. They're quite close to each other. So we rank them accordingly, and if there are multiple applications then that come within sort of within 10% of the top ones, so there's multiple that scored the best through the scoring process, that's when staff would then proceed to a lottery system in order to avoid making sort of decisions between, well, this application had 87% and this had 85%. The results of which, completely transparently, the actual score, the results of the lottery system get presented to council, as well as all that public input and staff's recommendation. And then council can sift through that.
And everybody's clear that the province won't ultimately approve an application unless council first passes a resolution approving that applicant. That's the final step for the province.
So it goes through our process first and then?
Goes through the province, they do their background checks, etc. And they say this applicant is cleared as to go through the process. We do our process, including the public input. You have to, then it comes to council. If you would say we approve applicant 1 and 5, and once you present to the province, then they will proceed. And there's other pieces in their process around, the store that they would go through as well as, similar to liquor, what a liquor inspector would do for a site. So they'll go through a similar process. Ultimately, I think for liquor, they have an approval in principle at one stage, and then based on what the plan is, and then ultimately they have the right to go into that store, make sure they've done what they said they would, and then they ultimately would issue an applicant, but they won't unless council first of all says we approve this applicant.
Go ahead, Councillor
So
Warmington.
presuming the zoning bylaw gets passed, at what point can an applicant request to vary zoning bylaw? Is there a point in this process where they're able to?
So I would probably leave that then to the zoning discussion. So regardless of what comes out of the zoning discussion, it would be the same procedures bylaw. So this, as is, would be applicable whether it were 5 stores or more, fewer, as long as there were some restriction on the number of stores. Then this processing bylaw would be applicable.
Okay, thank you.
We're not in discussion yet.
We're not in
still
discussion.
asking
If
questions.
you're requesting more information, you're clear on what we're discussing. You've had a description of what is being put before you, and this is a staff matrix to consider applications, and that would be then forwarded to council. And we're considering possibly the first 3 readings. So the first recommendation is that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Land Development Applications Procedures Amendment, Cannabis Licensing, Bylaw number 3407, 2018, be introduced and read a first and second time by title only.
I move that.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison, and it's seconded by Councillor Sherbo. And now we're up for discussion. Councillor Sherbo, go ahead.
So my question is we have medical marijuana stores currently in the city. Mm-hmm. Why cannot one of those apply to become a recreational marijuana store?
They will be able to apply. They're just as eligible, a priori as any other individual. They'll be able to apply as long as they meet the provincial regulations, any applicable federal regulations, and of course the standing regulations and bylaw at the time for
Province
cannabis.
has confirmed that they won't, assuming they meet all the other security requirements, they're not going to disqualify them. So again, they have to meet the provincial.
But they can't apply.
They can.
That's what, again, the province isn't going to penalize them for opening up when they shouldn't have.
All right, Councillor Daly.
I appreciate you bringing this back in this form. I suppose I think we did get a first look at it. And I had an objection at that time, and it still hasn't been addressed here. It was a minority view, but number 8 that talks about staff doing the scoring. My suggestion is that the scoring that the staff do ensure that it's has an acceptable security plan, that they have an adequate odor control, and beyond that, we leave it to the province, and that anyone that passes those, that test is then eligible to be part of a lottery rather than a pick and choose on the part of council based on even those numbers about their business experience or the other items. That I just would love to see it more simple and have a lottery for qualified applicants rather than a selection process. And I still hold that position.
Go ahead. Any other councillors have an
Some
opinion about that?
provinces have done that, and I think, part of the experience is they're getting applicants across the country, and if you have a pure lottery system, everyone's going to be in the bucket.
I had read some of that. I saw where there were 30, and they did each location. That was the other piece. They did location, and they had 27 or 30 applicants for a particular location.
Yeah.
And they had a 21-year-old just out of college that won the lottery, and so she's going to start a business, and this is what it's going to be. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
All right, thank you for your points. Any further discussion on that? Or is there any further, go ahead, Councillor
Well,
Sherwood.
I'm just going to say, I agree with Councillor Daly. I think it would be more, I don't know if fair is the right word, to have a lottery rather than, because like said, if you get one that's 80 and one that's 85, it's pretty hard to pick between the two of them.
But we're going to, as you saw in this bylaw, those will be considered equally, and they would both go in the lottery. But if you have one that's 50 and one that's 90, the 50 would not go into the lottery. All the 90s would go in, and 85s.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi.
Go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
So I just want to say that I really appreciate the work that the Development Services has put into this. And I actually like this scoring system. We haven't eliminated the need or the potential that there will be a lottery at some point. So I'm quite happy with the plan, the way it reads currently, and that's why I moved this motion.
Thanks, Councillor.
I think one thing council could consider is if you want to broaden that from 10 to 15 or 20, then I think that gives you, but I would encourage you not to, treat someone scoring 50 with someone scoring 90. I think that's too broad of a discrepancy to consider equal, but again, it's up to you ultimately.
Thank you.
I'd emphasize quickly as well too that this is a first, right? Legalization of recreational cannabis across Canada is a very big deal for all municipalities, and we're a bit of a smaller municipality as well too, and we've put in quite a bit of effort through the consultation and through staff research into this. Nonetheless, this is literally is a first attempt, not a first draft, but a first attempt at processing, at sort of contemplating this number of applications that we're anticipating for a limited number of retail locations. So this is something that we can certainly review, in a half a year and a year's time as well too, as we gain experience with it. But.
Go ahead, Councillor Warmington.
Well, the thing that I think about is who these business licenses go to. Are they going to big corporations that are swooping in to take advantage of this new industry, or is it going to local people in our community or in our region? And I don't see anywhere here that we can make any kind of scoring related to that, and I'm wondering if
Not through the scorings. That was part of the report then to the Committee of the Whole a couple of weeks ago, is that we did look into that. There has been community support. A number of people have expressed their desire that we do find a way to prioritize local businesses. However, given the free trade agreement situation in Western Canada, it's not dissimilar from NAFTA, for example. We have to treat, at the very least, every business or individual from Manitoba westwards equally. So you could choose to discriminate against companies from Ontario or from Newfoundland and Labrador, but
Colorado? No such luck.
yeah. However,
Oh.
However, yeah, it's not that easy. So again, at the end of the day, council does have discretion as to who goes forward, who's recommended to the province. However, as part of the matrix, we're simply not able to do that.
The thing we have done, though, is talk to our economic development partnership and Community Futures of putting on a program to assist our local businesses to make sure that they are putting forward strong applications. So we are looking at opportunities to assist our local businesses and giving them the best shot. Like I said, a true lottery system, you have zero control over that. So we're hoping our businesses step forward and put forward strong applications. I think that even though ultimately council will be able to pass a resolution of which ones they favor, I think could be in jeopardy if you don't have good, strong rationale. Someone else could challenge your process of, even though, for all these reasons, this one clearly stood out. You said, well, we're going to approve a different one. So I would say, you're not going to have free rein just to approve who you want to. It's going to have to be objectively that you're going to have to approve folks.
So this is where we're at, council. We either move forward with the first two readings or not, and unless there's any other debate.
I'll just bring forward get into a little more detail in number 7, where staff scoring applications. And I get that staff ought to score applications based on security plan, fire prevention, suppression. I get that staff should ensure that there's adequate odor control and protect the neighborhood or the neighbors or whatever. I just think you're going into a very gray area when you talk about previous successful business experience and background. How do you assign a number to how successful someone's been? What kind of businesses they've run. It just seems too broad. As well, location, exterior facade, active and aligned with design guidelines of a community plan. I mean, that we'll have other ways to deal with that. We've faced that issue.
Well, again, staff does this all the time. When we get RFPs for consultants, when we hire people, we look at all those factors and we do score them objectively, right? So we're not going to say you ran this business for 3 years and you get one score and somebody else ran it for 3 years and gets a different score. If you have 3 years of successful business experience, you haven't been bankrupt or something like that, then you would get a similar scoring. So, and that's why we're building in this factor, because we agree that is ultimately some subjectivity to it. However, council will have all that information if you think we've scored someone differently than you would because of what we identified as business experience, and you feel that should be stronger or not. You can say, convince your colleagues that that should be equal. These guys should be in the lottery and do that, right?
I just find it a little confusing that you mix site requirements with individual applicant requirements, and even the weighting, 15 points for a security plan and a maximum of 30 for if they've run a decent business. Security would be more important to me than how successful. If they fail in business, they fail. It's not going to affect our.
Well, again, we can bring this back and council can have another discussion around. That's why we did have a workshop, to hear from you whether you felt that our weighting was appropriate, the factors were appropriate. It's kind of hard.
So, Councillor, do you have a
Well, I would offer an amendment, as I argued it at the workshop, that it be weighted. The applicants pass an application, they pass staff's scrutiny and come to council. whatever that 50% or whatever the point is, and then they all go in a lottery.
Okay, you need a seconder for that.
I've got that.
So you meet the requirement to do the business, security and odor, and you either meet the requirement or not. And if you meet the requirement, you would all go into a lottery.
All right, so is there a seconder for Councillor Daly's amendment? Go ahead, Councillor Sherbo. Yeah, Councillor Sherbo is seconding the amendment, and now we're going into debate on the amendment.
I
Go ahead, Councillor Warmington.
agree with some of the discussion you had around the application has previous successful business experience. I don't think that's our issue. I don't think that's up to us. However, I don't like the lottery idea. I like to have some control over who gets these licenses, ultimately.
All right. So you would be speaking against the amendment because it's in a package here, but you would be interested in having more discussion on the aspects of what merits or what's involved in the matrix. Go ahead, Councillor Sherbo.
Didn't we say that we'd only have a lottery if all things were equal? If they're not equal, then we wouldn't.
Same.
I guess Kevin's example, one scored 50 points and the other one scored 90 points.
Well,
We wouldn't have a lottery.
yeah. Further discussion on this amendment. I'm going to call for a question on the amendment. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Morrison?
Hang on, sorry. No, I'm against.
All right. So that's 3 against here, and 2 for, and so the amendment fails. So now we're back to the main motion.
So I think your choice is either to pass this if you want to fine tune
pass
it,
it.
then I think you send it back to staff and have another workshop and kind of relook at this. We can't do that at a
Question.
council table.
Question.
All right. So all in favor of the first 2 readings?
Yay.
1, 2. Okay. Councillor Morrison, Councillor Adams, Councillor Sherbo, and Councillor Warmington.
I'll vote for it. I think we can
work with it. Okay, the motion carries. All right. And secondly, that the
Call for opposed if you.
would you if you want to be recorded opposed?
Yes.
Yep. And secondly, that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Land Development Applications Procedures Amendment Cannabis Licensing Bylaw Number 3407 2018 be read a 3rd time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. Seconder, please.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Is there further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Council. That was a big discussion. Now we go on to, we're still on cannabis, but this will be on zoning amendments. So the first item of business we talked about with cannabis was how we would score to possibly grant licenses. This one now is around zoning.
That's right. So we're bringing forward first and second reading for recreational cannabis. I just want to start from the beginning. I know that we've come to council a number of times on this issue. And so I'm going to start back at the public engagement process. So the proposed regulations are a result of a thorough public engagement process at the direction of council that ensured that residents and businesses had a voice in the development of regulations. The public engagement included information sessions with council, as well as the media, advertisements in the paper, 3 information booths, 5 open houses, 8 stakeholder meetings, and over 5,600 feedback forms were mailed to households and businesses. The response to the feedback form was overwhelming, with 32% of households returning the feedback form and 27% of businesses. The survey results are very clear. 75% of respondents thought that there should be a maximum number of retail stores, and overall, the results suggested a maximum of 5 cannabis stores. The feedback form specifically asked how many stores per area. We are proposing to translate the survey results directly into regulations by proposing a cap by area,
which translates into 2 stores downtown, 1 along Highway 3, Nelson Ave, 1 in the industrial area, Lakeside Drive, and 1 store in Railtown. As well, to accommodate a maximum of 5 cannabis retail stores and provide flexibility in location options while still providing a buffer from sensitive facilities, staff are generally proposing 150-meter separation distance from schools, parks, and youth facilities. There are some areas that have reduced separation distances, which I went over in the Committee of the Whole meeting on May 28th, but those include Lakeside Drive, downtown west of Josephine Street, the north side of Front Street, and 705 Nelson Ave. At the same time, we are also proposing to remove the medical cannabis zoning. The current rules were put in place until provincial and federal regulations were determined. The retail sale of medical cannabis is illegal, and will remain available only through online sales. The proposed zoning amendment bylaw will ensure that the City of Nelson is ready to accommodate cannabis retail stores once legalization takes effect, while managing the proximity of stores to places that children and youth frequent. Careful review of all the feedback gathered has been used to draft the zoning bylaw amendment that reflect the community and meet federal and provincial goals.
Thank you. Are there any questions for clarification purposes to staff?
Councillor Warmington asked about variances. Everyone, regardless of our zoning, has the right to ask for a variance. We would strongly encourage council that you set the zoning from how you, where you want these stores, and if you don't think where they are with these sensitive areas are correct, then you ask that to be amended. We'd strongly, by the time we're pretty confident we're going to be oversubscribed. By the time someone went and asked for a zoning variance, which takes 4 to 6 months, they would never be in the lottery. Their application would never get to the table by the time you issued the number of applicants. So, like I said, I would strongly encourage you to, pass the zoning that where you want these stores to be, and not be looking at zoning. And like I said, practically, you're going to get oversubscribed, and people aren't going to that need a rezone are not going to be there. And on the provincial side, you're going to have this kind of catch-22 because they won't approve any applicant that doesn't have the correct zoning, and so they're kind of forced in. Do they go through their process not knowing that someone is in the right zone, or do they wait for you to rezone, and then you rezone and you find out that they don't meet the provincial standards, so now you have a bunch of places rezone that aren't actually going to get an applicant. So it's the rezone process is going to be kind of messy.
All right. I haven't heard any further questions to staff for clarification to staff.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Councillor Adams.
It says, oops, let me read so I can read. It says here that there will be 1 store, I assume that's on Nelson Avenue / Highway 3A.
That's the
Highway
recommendation.
3A right out there. So,
It's also Nelson.
If you look at the zoning map, it identifies those areas, right?
okay.
It does, yeah.
Finish my question.
Sorry.
So we could actually have 3 downtown if you would let one go out here. This is downtown.
If you look at the,
Right, Anderson.
where's the,
Anderson turns into Nelson.
What?
So it's out towards the whole section of Fairview.
so if you look at,
It says
there,
Highway 3A.
there's a map in here though. It identifies the 5 zones.
Yep, that's correct.
in here?
Yeah.
It's attached to the bylaw. It's a Schedule C zoning map. That area is defined as a red zone, and so all the parcels that are permitted are colored in red.
How many pages? Sorry.
Yep.
Any other questions to staff for clarification? Go ahead, Councillor Daly.
Why did we exclude the downtown all the way over to Hendricks? That piece as not being downtown.
Because there's a park there. Hendrick Street Park.
I think, yeah, there's a park, there's some sensitive facilities as well.
So we have the Civic Center where you have a movie theater, gymnastics, etc. So that's a youth facility. So that's, you have to be 150 meters from there. We have Hendrick Street Park, and we have IOD Park in there as well. So all those things in that area excludes that portion of downtown.
Which is different than what we agreed to on the other, allowing a dispensary at where the Commons is now.
That was, yeah, when we relooked at that, it was clearly, as you saw in the public feedback, they identified 300 to 500 meters from a sensitive facility, and, you know, we felt that was impractical and reduced it to 150 or less in some cases, but you do have some sensitive facilities in the downtown core. Just as Lake Street has got the youth center, so that's a sensitive area as well.
So I sense that we're getting possibly close to discussion and debate on this, so I'm going to we're going to put the motion on the floor, and then we'll have debate. And the first is that the zoning amendment recreational cannabis bylaw number 3406 2018 be introduced and read a first time and second time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. Second.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. That's Sherbo and Morrison. And now the floor is open for debate.
And I guess the other thing for council to remember is this is moving it to a public hearing. You're going to hear from the public at that public hearing, so this is just moving it to that next step.
Thank you.
It's a zoning change, so it has to go to public hearing.
I see, okay.
All right, so any further discussion? Are you ready for the question? All in favor?
Yay.
Opposed? Motion carries. And secondly, that council directs staff to schedule a public hearing. Thank you, Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Sherbo. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Council. Now we're on to our next big item, and that would be our pedestrian amendment bylaw and bylaw notice of enforcement, traffic enforcement. So when we embarked on looking at what to do with our very busy downtown streets and how to gracefully handle some of the social issues that we were seeing on the street and how to handle those with some dignity and respect, we consulted more broadly with community. We consulted with our social sector, with our business sector, and we put a few things in place. We have a beat officer, a full-time beat officer once again. We have a street outreach team, and we continue to work hard towards ensuring that there is civility in our streets. And without penalizing people in a provincial court system, but also what we were wanting to do is move forward in a way that would help us, would help our police and bylaw department have a few more tools in their belt. So we set to work doing that. We've had a long process getting here, and what is brought forward by staff is this pedestrian amendment bylaw that outlines civil behavior pretty much on our streets and how we hope to achieve that. And it is here for first three readings. We're going to rescind the old bylaw that was called panhandling bylaw, and that's very erroneous. It should never have been called a panhandling bylaw because panhandling as an act itself is not illegal and cannot be illegal. It is under the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms that people are allowed to ask for money. And what we've discovered is that this is not about whether or not people are asking for money. This is about how we behave in our downtown core. So the first motion is that the first three readings of the Corporation of the City of Nelson Panhandling Regulatory Bylaw number 3321 2015 be rescinded. Do I have a mover? Thanks, Councillor Warmson. Second. Thank you, and second by Councillor Morrison. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Secondly, we now are moving into what we would like to propose, and that is that the City of Nelson Traffic Pedestrian Regulations Amendment Bylaw number 3405-2018 be read a first time and a second time by title only. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Warmington. We now are open for discussion and debate.
I think the other piece, and unfortunately it's how the structure of your agenda is and where we put things on the report or on
The agenda?
how you deal with things, and in terms of your procedure bylaw, that these things come before reports. But this is part of that larger strategy of how to best manage what the expectations in the downtown, and so that this is really in conjunction with that larger strategy. It just shows up here because of the ordering of your procedures bylaw.
All right. Any further discussion or debate? All in favor? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Councillor Sherbo.
No, it's okay.
All right. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Council. And third, that the City of Nelson Traffic Pedestrian Regulations Amendment Bylaw number 3405-2018 be read a third time by title only. Do I have a mover? Councillor Warmington, do I have a seconder? Councillor Sherbo, any discussion? Yes, Councillor Sherbo.
Like defines a pedestrian here means a person on foot or in a wheelchair, whether motorized or not. One thing I never thought of until now is we have people riding bicycles on the sidewalk.
Oh, no.
Now,
That's
how
a
would,
different.
That is a different matter that's dealt with in the traffic control bylaw. So that's-
okay.
Yeah, a bicycle is considered a vehicle. Well, I don't know, that's probably the wrong term.
Yeah, I just know that it's dealt with elsewhere in the traffic.
It's dealt with more like a vehicle.
We should do something about it.
Yeah, we're working on it. All in favor? Or sorry, Councillor Daly.
Yeah, I mean, bylaws to make it safer for everyone on the street or make everyone feel more comfortable on the street's important. And people not be impeded and businesses not be impeded from doing their business. I mean, it's an issue that many communities struggle with. And how do we do this? I think this is a good move, a good step forward. It's also about how do we enforce this. So I'm glad to see we're talking about education and getting people out there, that people know that it's not okay to lie down in a doorway and go to sleep. And at the same time, we have to look at how do we, this is our most vulnerable people that live in our communities on the streets and we need to find better ways to make sure that they don't end up on the street. And I know it's a challenge for all communities. And I just want to make sure that we're out there and we've got the people, the staff to go out there and talk to these people and let them know, that what's okay and what's not. And I know we're going to be speaking with the police chief and monitoring what effect this has. In some ways, I mean, like any bylaw, it's going to be a test to see how well it makes it more comfortable for people to be on the street and not be obstructed. I also think there's a couple other issues that people need if they feel threatened. We do have Safe Street Acts, and people do need to know that they ought to call the police if they feel threatened or followed or obstructed in any way or threatened in any way, because we need to know about that and deal with that. And it's going to be those repeat people that are really going to be treated more effectively by the court system and maybe banned from downtown if they're doing this repeatedly. So I'm in favor. Let's see where this goes, and I appreciate that the different sectors have been, doesn't please everyone, but it's different sectors in Nelson have been consulted, and here we are.
Thank you, Councillor. Go ahead, Councillor Sherbo.
Well, I'd just like to add, it's not just people that are lying down on the street. We all know that around the Bank of Commerce is a congested area, and one day there was about 10 people there on the sidewalk, conversing, not moving, smoking cigarettes, I hope, and people are intimidated to try and push through a group of young men like that. So I think that's another issue that this can deal with.
Thank you, Counselor. We're moving forward on third reading. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Aye.
Thank you, Counselor Morrison. Now, this next recommendation is around how we enforce our bylaws. So, as the City of Nelson, our first course of action is to educate people and to before we go through enforcement. And this is how we conduct ourselves. This is how we will, the message we are giving to bylaw and to police, to when we want this enforced and what our course of action is. It's always to inform people and educate before we actually enforce a bylaw. So this next piece is that the City of Nelson Bylaw Enforcement Amendment Bylaw number 3414/2018 be read a first time and a second time by title only. Do you have a mover?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconder, please. Councillor Sherbo. All right. Any discussion on this?
Everybody recognizes you need penalties in the bylaw, or it's not enforceable. So
yeah.
So it's a requirement,
Yep.
and we have talked to the victim services folks. They're willing, if it comes to that, look at restorative justice process, and
Yeah.
so there's some avenues that we've explored and seem viable.
Thank you.
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Morrison.
I'm just sort of thinking, in terms of this, I know we've had this discussion about, probably the people that we might be finding don't have any money, but I think the prices here in terms of what the penalties are much more reasonable than the Safe Streets Act, which I believe starts at $186 for an initial violation. And as with all our bylaws, I see attached in our package is the idea of how we enforce them in terms of what's been mentioned earlier, trying to do education first before these bylaws get applied. And I think the bylaw schedule that's been developed here at 50, the 20 if it's paid early, and the $100 is a reasonable, in terms of the dollar figure is reasonable.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Well, I mean, I want to make a comment that, we talk about the finding of the folks that are doing this, and you mentioned some of the programs we're doing, but the other program that people do, if people encounter people on the street that live in our town, that are part of our town, there are mental health first aid courses. A lot of these folks suffer mental health issues or addictions, and I think we all need to recognize that that's not going away, and we all need to learn a little more about how do we approach those people. How do we deal with them? And I'm certain our staff, our police, and our bylaw are trained in that, and the general public, if they're interested, it's available.
Thank you. Councillor Warmington.
Some of these fees would be replaced by a restorative justice process. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's what we're looking at. If someone chooses restorative justice, that we could waive the fee for them. But the general principle, if you don't have a fee, you can't
Well, you can't
have a bylaw.
Yeah, you can't have a bylaw. That's the way they work. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And fifth, that the City of Nelson Bylaw Enforcement Amendment Bylaw number 3414/2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Morrison and Councillor Warmington. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Council.
I'm just wondering if you want to deal with the downtown vitality report now, since it's directly connected to this.
Sure. So we're going to move to item 10A, Council, on your agenda, and it's the Downtown Nelson Vitality Report. This is it's an extensive report, and I think probably when you looked at your agenda and saw this one item at 148 pages, you almost dropped your teeth. But it includes a couple of reports that you've seen before around the downtown downtown waterfront planning document, as well as the revitalization planning documents here as well. So that makes up the bulk of this report, but it also speaks to what we hope to do to encourage the vitality in our downtown neighborhoods and in our core. So, Mr. Toom, do you have anything to say about it?
I was here for the other item before this one jumped the.
This is all.
So I'm going to get a motion on the floor. There are recommendations within this report, but I'm going to get this on the floor before we have discussion. And the first one is that council receive the final report, Downtown Vitality, and approve the recommendations within the report. Do I have a mover? Thank you, councillors Sherbo and Daly. The floor is open for discussion.
So I can start. So we did, basically we drew on a number of things, the community meetings that we did have with the business sector, the social sector, the health sector, police, city staff, and the Stolte workshop around where the challenges were. We looked at the street outreach report, the work that they'd done, and the report that they had sent to council, the information that was provided by our beat officer in terms of how things were going, and then additional research staff had, and then the meetings that we had with all sectors. So we had that workshop with council with some recommendations. Those were expanded based on the workshop and the ideas that council had. Those were brought out to the various groups. Some ideas were kicked around, and the major change to this report was putting a bunch of potential actions that came out of those discussions. And as you see, this is really a sort of a comprehensive approach of how we address the challenges. One of the pieces was some additional regulations, which you dealt with earlier, but most of the work is around how do we create certainly behavior standards, how we support people. There's some ideas around temporary employment, instead of people having to sit on the corner panhandling, maybe they can be that person collecting donations and get funded for doing that. So looking for opportunities to give value back to people and a chance to earn income. Certainly how do we support Nelsonites versus people coming into our community and tying up our limited resources. So there's all sorts of ideas out there, and the intent would be to form this committee, bring these to that group and start to identify which ones people think we could move forward on in the short term and medium term, and what resources that would take. And because it's, I think a key thing that we found from street outreach, of the almost 300 people in the peak, there, maybe 20 to 25 of those were actually panhandlers. There's, that's a small portion of the number of folks that we see on the street, and even on the the housing side of it. The street outreach workers identified there's 10 to 20 Nelsonites that aren't housed, and most of those have been housed, but have had challenges staying in housing, and they're a bit of a challenge. So most of the people are in some type of housing, and how do you support people more in their own homes? How do you support people that are coming into our community in their own communities, as opposed to having to always come into Nelson? And again, our resources are stretched. We do outreach with even our library. They go out into the Slocan to provide servicing. So again, I think those rural communities need to step up, and some of our service providers here that provide regional services need to look at how they provide those closer to people's homes versus always having people have to come into Nelson and get those services.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Daly.
I would just say, I like the overall plan. I don't know that there's that many communities that have a comprehensive revitalization downtown plan like this. And I think we can be proud of the fact that most people are really interested in making a difference, making downtown livable for everyone and safe and comfortable for everyone. And I just wanted to say thanks to the business folks that have taken time off work to attend meetings with the Fentanyl Task Force and the Street Culture Collaborative and give their input. And I really, whether it was from business or social sector and health, of course, our police and staff, and it's going to take everyone understanding what we can and can't do to make a difference, to move the needle a little bit, to move the dial a little bit, so that it's a livable city for everyone.
Thank you. All in favor, council? Opposed? Motion carries. And secondly, that council directs staff to develop a terms of reference for a downtown improvement committee. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Warmington, seconder. Councillor Sherbill. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I think that what we've done as a community, includes council and everyone else, is this is not easy work. It's complicated work, and we've put a lot of effort into doing these things, and we will continue. And I can tell you as well that I know that when any of us are traveling to other communities, there are people asking how we did this in Nelson and what we're doing to move forward, especially on more difficult issues like this. So it's appreciated. Now, if you can direct me back to where I skipped.
So we're going to go back to the fees and charges amendment bylaw, which is item 9.
Item 9.
Go back to what?
This is for some development service charges.
9D.
Oh, yeah, that.
Thank you.
Robin, can you push the little button on the,
Yeah,
just hold it
cool
till
it
kicks
off.
in. Just
All
hold it
right.
till it kicks in.
So this is to update our charges, fees and charges on development and building charges. And it's, I guess you would call it a bit of a housekeeping.
And a couple additions.
Go ahead,
All
Mr.
right.
Toom.
I'll just speak to two of the charges, and of course, happy to speak to answer any questions on the others. So the the pages 1 and 2 of the RFD have a summary table of the new and amended fees. Specifically, the second one on this table, so on page 1 then, development permit for a laneway house. Right now we're not taking development permits for a laneway house, but as per the direction, our discussions with you through the committees of the whole, we are going to be looking, hopefully as early as next month, then at bringing development or design guidelines for development permits for laneway houses over 5 meters in height to council for consideration. So sort of preemptively, we're proposing to put this charge in place, which is the same fee as a minor development permit. Secondly, the fourth item on this table, still on page 1, is on cannabis licensing. So this links into the procedures bylaw, of which the first 3 readings you passed not too long ago. When at the time when an application gets referred to the city by the province, in order to launch that work that we do through going through the public input, having to pay for an advertisement in the newspaper, reading through, checking off the boxes for applications, going through the scoring matrix, preparing the reports for bringing them to council, that's what this fee covers. So currently, the fee for liquor licensing processing for a new liquor license is $2,000. This is a one-time fee, to be clear. So there's an annual business license. Once an application has been accepted, there's an annual business license fee that will come up at a later time. For liquor, I think it's only $260 or something. We're not anticipating that would be much different for cannabis necessarily, but we're talking really about, well, the bulk of work that it takes up front at the time of application. So the liquor licensing fee was where our starting point was at $2,000, but to cover which covers the 11 to 12 hours or so of time that it takes to do that, as well as overhead, and bringing up to $3,000 given the additional time requirements then for cannabis licensing specifically.
Any questions? Any need for clarification? Okay, let's get the recommendation on the table that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Fees and Charges Amendment Development Charges Update Bylaw Number 3408 2018 be introduced and read a first and a second time by title only. Mover, please. Thank you, Councillor Wormington. Seconder, please. Councillor Sherbo, is there any discussion on this? All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. And secondly, that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Fees and Charges Amendment Development Charges Update Bylaw Number 3408 2018 be read a third time by title only. Mover, please. Councillor Wormington, second by Councillor Daly. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. We'll go on to 9E, and this is a zoning amendment bylaw for 1902 Silver King Road. So, this is a request to rezone from R2 medium density to CD9, and there's a report from staff.
Thank you. This is a city-initiated rezone of the lands at 1902 Silver King Road from R2 medium-density residential to a hybrid comprehensive development zone that will allow for both low-density and the existing medium-density residential development. At the April 16th council meeting, council approved an agreement with the applicant. As per this agreement, the city agreed to bring forward a zoning amendment to allow for low-density residential development. Although the application is reducing the density required on the property, the proposed hybrid zone will allow for both the existing medium-density residential as well as for low-density residential development. And this will allow the city to secure a critical right-of-way for city infrastructure.
Any questions or need for clarification from Ms. Moreau? First, let's move ahead. That the zoning amendment 1902 Silver King Road Bylaw Number 3411 2018 be introduced and read a first time and a second time by title only.
Moved.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. Seconder. Councillor Daly. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Secondly, that council directs staff to schedule a public hearing. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. And seconded by Councillor Morrison. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to item 9F, and this is 746 Highway 3A, and this is another request for a rezone.
This is a zoning and OCP amendment for one large lot. It's currently zoned R2 medium density, and the application is subdivided into 4 parcels, with 3 parcels zoned R1 and 1 staying at R2 medium density. So we first saw this project last year where council approved variances for water, fire protection, and location of the sanitary sewer. This project also requires an OCP amendment for the 3 new lots that are proposed to go to low-density residential from multi-unit residential. There are a number of reasons why it's appropriate to reduce the density on a portion of this property. The steep slope of the lot results in slope stability issues on a large portion of the property. There is limited highway access with no new access points allowed. We are requiring a 5-meter dedication of land for a waterfront pathway along the entire south boundary of the property adjacent to the lake. And we are also requiring a 6-meter access for emergency vehicles along the entire north boundary of the property. We are recommending approval of this zoning and OCP amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Moreau. And we have a recommendation that the official community plan amendment bylaw number 3410 2018 be introduced and read a first time and a second time by title only. Mover, Councillor Morris, Councillor Wormington, second by Councillor Daly. Is there any discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Sherbo.
This is just across the bridge.
Correct.
Below that RV park.
Yeah.
Trailer park, yes.
All right, all in favor? Opposed, the motion carries. And secondly, that zoning amendment bylaw number 3409, 2018 be introduced and read a first time and second time by title only.
Moved.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison, second by Councillor Sherbo. All in favor? Opposed, carried. And that council directs staff to schedule a public hearing. Thank you, Councillor Daly, and seconded by Councillor Adams. All in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Thanks, council. Is everybody hanging in there? We're doing good. We've got a subdivision amendment bylaw. Hang in there with me now. We're doing good. And this is a housekeeping item. Would you like to explain why that is?
Sure. So we're requesting 2 minor amendments to the subdivision and development servicing bylaw that will streamline the planning approval process and facilitate development. So the first one is due to a variety of conditions in Nelson, the steep slopes, the location of the existing infrastructure, there are times when an alternative standard is desired. And this amendment will allow for that alternative standard rather than the regulations in the subdivision and development bylaw, as long as they are approved by the Director of Public Works.
All right.
The second amendment is in 2 parts. The first provides clarity around cash in lieu for the provision of sidewalks when a subdivision occurs. And the second part is about how we cost out road improvements for subdivisions. So right now, if you want to subdivide, we make you upgrade the road to city standard. And if your property happens to be a long way from an existing road that meets city standard, we make you pay for the entire cost of upgrading that road. So for example, if you have a subdivision that's 300 meters from an existing road built to city standard, then you are required to pay approximately $300,000 to upgrade that road, because it's about $100,000 per block. So we currently have situations like this that are resulting in lands being sterilized because of the road improvement costs. So under this proposed amendment, the applicant would only pay for the cost to upgrade the road directly in front of their property and only for half of that road.
Thank you. Good.
So, all right, so let's start with the first one, that the subdivision and development servicing amendment bylaw number 3412, 2018 be introduced and read a first and second time by title only. Do I have a mover?
Move it for discussion.
Okay, Councillor Adams, seconded by Councillor Warmington, and let's have discussion on this.
Could we have an example of what that might look like?
For the first one?
Yeah.
So a lot of our sanitary infrastructure is in the lane, and yet our subdivision and development servicing bylaw says that all of the services have to come from the front of the lot. So it doesn't, and then we're the ones who put those services in place, and so this really regulates us and tells us that no, we have to make the applicant pay to get us all the way around to the front of the lot, or to do a variance.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Daly.
I'm just wondering if we're talking about Railtown here a little bit.
No,
Not at all?
not at all.
Okay.
No.
Thank you. No further questions or discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Secondly, that the subdivision development servicing amendment bylaw 3412, 2018 be read a third time by title only. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. Seconder, please. Councillor Warmington, any discussion on this? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. All right. We're now on the laneway housing amendment bylaw, and that's H. All right. So we already passed first and second reading and had a public hearing just now. And now we're moving to discussion on what we've heard and decisions. So there's a staff recommendation that the zoning amendment laneway housing bylaw number 3400, 2018 be read a third time by title only. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Daly. Seconder, please. Councillor Sherbo. And do we have discussion?
Well, only that I'm happy to see this because it means more densification of the property. Nelson's pretty limited in what we have, and now a property owner can have a home with a suite as well as a tiny home, a laneway house that a family member or someone could live in. It can't be used as a short-term rental, but it could be, I suppose, a rental, and that's the kind of a smaller residents. It's going to provide a space for someone starting out or someone working in the service industry, which is part of our housing needs in this community, growing housing needs. And you're not limited to having just a two. You can have a suite in your house, the house you live in, and the laneway house. I think it's a win-win. And we've covered some of the parking issues and around that, although we have some concerns and people are going to have to be, well, one concern we heard is around snow removal, a big one around that. So when we're saying let's park on the street, I think people are going to have to also know that you're going to have to shovel your streets and enforce our bylaws that, you know, when we have a snowstorm, they shovel their area where they're going to park and not
If
take
they
this.
just park on the opposite side of the street, we'll come plow it for them.
Right, exactly.
And I think this last winter there was, I think there was fairly good compliance. People tried really hard, and as soon as they knew the signage was posted, "We're cleaning your street," they were pretty good about getting their vehicles moved.
It's not very neighborly to wait for your neighbor to finish shoveling the snow and then go park in that spot when he goes to the store.
All right, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Second, that the zoning amendment laneway housing bylaw number 3400-2018 be finally adopted. Do I move her? Councillor Daly, seconder, please. Councillor Warmington, all in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. And third, that the off-street parking and landscape amendment laneway housing bylaw number 3401-2018 be finally adopted. Councillor Daly moves, and second by Councillor Sherbo. Any discussion there?
So if, how to put it, if they can get off-street parking, can we encourage them to do that? Rather than parking on the street?
I think our regulations do address having off-street parking for suites or laneway houses. It's that's our first preference is to create an additional spot either on your property or potentially a neighboring property. Some areas are, as you know, super challenging to create that off-street parking, but
we should do an inventory of how many cars, how many vehicles there are in the city. Because I think it increases as young people are available to get their driver's license. I think we get more and more cars in the city. I wouldn't doubt it, it's close to the population.
we're having a good neighbor bylaw that you limit the number of children you have in vehicles.
Or don't let them have cars.
I don't know. The statistics I'm reading, Councillor Sherbo, is saying that more young people are opting not to buy vehicles now and are looking at other sources of transportation because of the expense of maintaining a vehicle and also because they're really concerned about the environment. So that's kind of what the research that I've been seeing.
But that might be in the big city.
Well, I don't know. I see a lot of young...
From here to Caslo without a vehicle.
I mean, I'm satisfied that we're still requiring 2 parking spots,
Yeah.
and then it's going to be the Director of Development Services looks and says, is there other place to park that's not going to impede on your neighbor?
Yeah.
You know.
So are we ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Council. All right, we're moving along. Now we have the delegation amendment bylaw, and this is to put the appropriate direction in place regarding authority to the city's Director of Development Services, and it's submitted for the first 3 readings, this bylaw. So the recommendation is that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Delegation Amendment Bylaw number 3413-2018 be introduced and read a first time and a second time by title only.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. See, she is not asleep at the switch. Thank you, Councillor. Seconder. Councillor Warmington, is there any discussion on this? All in favor? Oh, no, you're no question. Okay. Opposed? Motion carries. And secondly, that the Corporation of the City of Nelson Delegation Amendment Bylaw 3413-2018 be read a third time by title only. All in favor? Or pardon me, you're moving. Thank you. And Councillor Adams is seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Now we're moving on to a strata title conversion at 471 Baker Street. So everybody look lively for this one. This is a bit of a different request to us, and I'll let you go ahead and speak to it.
Sure. 471 Baker Street is applying to stratify an existing building into 4 separately titled parcels. It's an existing one-story building on Baker Street. Right now it has 2 stores in it, the Potorium and Hall Street Printing. They basically want to add a second story on top and put 2 residential units. In order to stratify, the Strata Property Act requires a council resolution to permit it. This is generally to protect rental housing. In this case, there is no rental housing that would be lost as a result of the stratification, so staff are recommending approval.
Thank you. All right, so we have a recommendation that pursuant to Section 242 of the Strata Property Act, the conversion of the previously occupied building located on Parcel B, C 187221, or 22I, I believe, of Lot 8, Block 9, District Lot 95, Kootenai District Plan 9500, PID 013-463-136, into strata lots be approved. Do I have a mover?
Move.
Thank you,
So
Councillor.
moved.
And seconder, please. Councillor Sherbo, and we will open the floor for discussion on this.
I think it's a good idea. It's what you call the airspace, filling in the airspace. So I think it's an excellent idea.
All right.
And I think
Councillor,
the other thing is, just because it's a strata doesn't mean that someone won't rent it as a rental property. It just means you own it individually. You know, lots of our strata buildings, people rent those spaces.
And under our rules, you'd have to live there to have an Airbnb, so it would be a long-term rental.
Well, no, you're in the C1 zone, so you're.
Oh, you can see one zone, you can do an
It's
Airbnb.
That's right. It's a tourist accommodation, so it's a commercial use. They are allowed to do it. But from what I understand, they are planning to be long-term rentals, although there's nothing that we can tie them to that, but that was the plan for them, so.
all right.
I think we'll be seeing more stratas, but as we look at, larger homes in Nelson that could be stratified into 3 homes in that. So.
All right, all in favor? Opposed, motion carries. And secondly, that the authority to exercise the powers and performance of duties required under Section 242 of the Strata.
So moved, so you don't read out those numbers.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison. You saved me. And seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Warmington. Is there any discussion on this? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Onward. We have a UBCM resolution regarding short-term rental enforcement. So, I'm sorry, folks, I lost my place here again. The heck?
10C.
Thanks. I think I found it now. You're right. So we have been very clear that short-term rental enforcement needs to be shared by, responsibility on enforcement needs to be shared and should not all fall to municipalities. And we're looking to put forward a resolution to the Union of British Columbia Municipalities in September. And the resolution reads, whereas the province announced in February 2018 that it struck an agreement with Airbnb whereby the latter will collect both provincial sales tax, PST, and the municipal and regional district tax, MRDT, on short-term guest stays in British Columbia. And in April 2018, a second agreement was announced between Airbnb and the City of Vancouver, where Airbnb will not accept listings in that city that do not hold a municipal business license, and whereas most municipalities are achieving only minimal compliance with their short-term rental regulations, particularly when compared to the compliance of conventional accommodators, and those municipalities that do have high compliance must charge exceptionally high license fees in order to cover compliance check costs. Therefore, be it resolved that UBCM requests that the province negotiate a province-wide agreement with Airbnb and other regionally active short-term rental platforms to assist municipalities with compliance checks whereby short-term rental platforms agree to require their hosts to provide proof of a valid municipal business license in order to advertise using their service. Do I have a mover? Councillor Warmington, I got a seconder, Councillor Daly, and I have Mr. Toom waiting in the wings.
Not much to say other than to translate the resolution into shorter, blunter sentences. Earlier this year, the city of Vancouver somehow, I couldn't tell you exactly how, but they did manage to strike a deal with Airbnb that the Airbnb has agreed to not list Airbnbs within the city of Nelson unless they... Yeah, we're getting there.
We're next.
The city of Vancouver, unless they have a municipal business license. So in order, basically, if you're going to start doing Airbnb, or even if you have an existing listing, you have to input your municipal business license number. We thought, well, if this is being done, if the city of Vancouver was able to negotiate such a deal with a company like Airbnb, why not request that the province try and get a similar agreement that would also benefit us on the same sort of terms and level that it's benefiting the city of Vancouver.
Good.
We did try to negotiate this. They weren't that interested, but Vancouver's paved the way. So
Well, they swing a little more weight, but we're not far behind.
And as a province as a whole, right? Instead of the city of Nelson trying to go to Airbnb and knocking on their door, if the province were able to do that,
Yeah, that'd be good.
different. Yeah.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, folks. We'll see how that fares at UBCM. I think it'll be met with pretty good approval. Now we have a request, an agenda item on the Mural Festival. And we are looking tonight at where the location of 2 murals to be located on city property. Staff is recommending that council approves the use of the Falls Street retaining wall for the 2018 Mural Festival contingent on a recommendation from the Cultural Development Committee. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Adams. As seconder, please. Councillor Warmington. Discussion on this one. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Secondly, that council approves the use of the Capitol Theatre for the 2018 Mural Festival contingent on a recommendation from the Cultural Development Committee. Thank you, Councillor Sherbo. Seconder. Councillor Warmington. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. This is going to be an exciting event. And actually, staff, thanks for including the report is very colorful and good. It's the conceptual drawings that are put forward for these murals look pretty amazing. We now have reports we have reports from the Finance Department and the Building Department. Mr. McClure, do you have anything to say about anything? No. Okay.
I'll move receipt.
You betcha you will. Okay, and is there any discussion?
I'll second.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Councillor Adams. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
I just want to say, based on tonight and what we see in building permits, our development services staff are extremely busy.
Yes.
Good.
And, we just want to thank them for moving as much forward as they have been, not just developments, but also our policy work, and just ask the community for some level of patience. They got a lot on their plate. We have just hired a new person to help out, and he's starting Wednesday. So we are trying to get some additional resources. As I informed council, unfortunately, our current building inspector has accepted a managerial position at the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary. We have interviewed, and we're hopeful that we'll have that person replaced by the time he leaves, and we'll continue the work we're doing. If not, we will be looking for Plan B of how we resource building permit department, because it's vital to ensure this development you see on this sheet actually happening out there, and everyone is extremely busy.
$17 million on here.
Yeah, and you look at what's happening in Grand Forks, all that's going to tax our contracting industry and building inspectors, and so it's a challenge all across the region of holding these positions. The province increased the requirements for training and qualifications, and that's again taxed all communities of getting qualified people in place. It's a tough area.
Just a quick on the public hearings that, on the rezone, is that gonna happen, is there a timeline? Is that like in a month, within a month or two, or the public hearing?
That you saw?
Yeah.
We have 4 or 5. I said we have 4 or 5 public hearings that we need to come up with.
But you can do more than one.
For sure.
Yeah, we saw how that worked.
Any sense, Pam, on the timing of when those will come back again?
Well, no summer vacation for you folks. Thank you for that, and thanks to Development Services. We know that it's extremely busy, and with all the new bylaws regarding cannabis and laneway housing and all of the things that we're doing, our small short-term rentals, yeah, our Development Services Department is probably one of the busiest for a city of this size. I don't know. I'd say we are the busiest. We have some agenda minutes. We have minutes from the Library Board, the Cultural Development Committee, the Heritage Working Group, and the Nelson and Area Economic Development Partnership. I have a mover for, thank you, Councillor Daly, seconded by Councillor Sherbo. And is there any discussion on any of those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed, the motion carries. And the last item we have here on the formal agenda here is the council action item list. And are there any items that anybody would like to pull on there for discussion? Councillor Adams, go ahead.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Christmas lights.
Yes.
Is the report going to be done, and are we going to have Christmas lights this year?
We could have Christmas in July. I think that is part of our on the work plan, and it's yes. And it says here the due date is for July 31st. So that should be coming back to council in July. Could I have someone move receipt? Thank you. And Councillor Daly, seconded by Councillor Adams. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And council, unless you have some urgent items that you would like to report, I'm going to ask that we defer council reports to our next committee of the whole meeting. Would that sit well, or is there anything urgent?
FCM was great.
Yeah, FCM was a huge learning experience. Councillor Sherbo Warmington and myself attended, and we saw a lot of what the city of Halifax is doing around development and many things. But thank you, council. Could I have a resolution to adjourn? Thank you, Councillor Warmington, seconded by Councillor Daly. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thanks very much.
Are we done?
We are done.
Good.
Do we have some?
Could I